after being upstaged by almost every single other AI company, DeepSeek, Mistral, and OpenAI to name a few, Meta has finally released Llama 4, its most advanced generation of open models that you can use today. Mark Zuckerberg was clearly waiting to make sure that no one else was going to steal the spotlight from this release, and of course, they waited long enough that this release is a little bit disappointing, but I'll get into why that is in just a bit. So these models are pretty incredible. I think you'll be pretty excited about the kind of hardware you can run these models on, and I want to get into a few really interesting details about these latest Llama 4 models. So welcome to AI Flux, let's get into it. So I've been in SF for about the last 2 months working on some really interesting AI stuff that I can't wait to share with you guys, but you're gonna have to wait just a little bit longer. But today I'm here to talk about Llama 4. So Meta released 3 different models, 2 of which you can use today, and a really cool thing is these are actually being deployed on Hugging Face using a really cool new framework called Hext. Look in the description below if you want to check that out. So the 3 models are Llama 4 Behemoth, Llama 4 Maverick, and Llama 4 Scout. And in usual Meta style, they've released 3 distinct models and not 20 like we usually see from Alibaba with their Qwen model. So what's the difference between these 3 models? Llama 4 Behemoth is actually just available as a preview right now. It's the most intelligent version, and it's what they did with the last Llama 3 announcement. They gave us a little bit of a hint and then gave us the best model a little bit later. This model has 288 billion active parameters with 16 experts, so it's a mixture of experts model, and in total, it was trained on 2 trillion parameters. Llama 4 Maverick is right in the middle. It has 17 billion active parameters with 128 experts and 400 billion total parameters, so still quite large relative to latest or previous most powerful Llama 3 model. And they're saying here that it's native multimodal with a 1 million token context length, which in this day and age is actually quite common. Smallest, that I think is the most interesting for local AI, is Llama 4 Scout with 17 billion active parameters, 16 experts, and 109 billion total parameters. This actually has a 10 million token context length, and it's optimized for inference. And in theory, with some napkin math, I figured out if you have 48 gigs of VRAM with one of the latest GPUs from NVIDIA, the Q3 quants of this model should fit. Obviously, this was just released, so it's going to take some time to understand if that's actually the case, but that's what we're looking at right now. The other interesting thing with these models is their knowledge cutoff is August of 2024. So their knowledge is relatively recent, but obviously these models always lag by a little bit. And for some rough specs of what you can actually do with these other models, in theory, you could probably fit Llama 4 Maverick on about a single H100 node. You could probably fit it on a single H100 DGX host, or something that was distributed for greater efficiency, but it's hard to say what you'd actually have to do to get there. So let's jump into what these models can actually do. So Meta gives us some key takeaways here. So obviously this is the first set of models they've shown us from the Llama 4 herd, which will enable people to build more personalized multimodal experience. So multimodality is clearly a key focus here, whereas in Llama 3, they were really only focusing on text and a few other interesting tools. And it looks like their goal here was, relatively speaking, to aim for 17 billion active parameters with around 16 experts, with the idea being that you could fit this on a single H100 GPU. Now, when they say H100 GPU, in reality here, they mean probably a single NVIDIA DJX system. You could have it all on one GPU, but the performance likely would not be really that great. And they're aiming for better results than you can get with Google's Gemma 3 or Gemini 2.0 Flash, which is great, but in my opinion, these models still lag behind the latest Anthropic models. They mentioned a few benchmarks right off the bat, saying that Llama 4 Maverick can score an ELO of 1,417 on LM Arena, but these benchmarks are basically meaningless until we've had them go through a lot of benchmarking for about 2 or 3 days. So I'm going to not talk about benchmarking too much in this initial video. And one thing that is reflected in these models is these models are more intended to be used in everyday use. They're not meant to be targeted models like Llama 3 was, where the idea was you could use them for lookups or mathematics or thinking. This has been a major shift in Meta's approach to AI generally, and you can see this a lot with their integrations with WhatsApp and a lot of their emerging tooling. And you can see here that they're really focusing on this single H100 GPU metric with int4 quantization, which is pretty interesting. And you'll see that they also mentioned an H100 host, which you can roughly equate to one of the smaller DJX workstations that NVIDIA has currently available. A big attribute of these models, and this was common in Llama 3, is the use of pre-training. So pre-training is a really popular way to eke a little bit more performance out of models. Mistral has used this quite extensively with their OCR models. So people know that multimodality really benefits from pre-training. And Meta pretty much says here that in order to get this next level of performance they were looking for, they also had to make some interesting changes to their architecture and their training philosophy with pre-training. So they say here that our new Llama 4 models are the first models that use a mixture of experts architecture. Only a single token activates a fraction of the total parameters. So this is basically functioning like most of the models we see from OpenAI. What this means is you get a bit better efficiency when it comes to using the compute on a GPU, and you also get better density relative to the quality that you're looking at, which is pretty cool. So it basically means you can get a bit more of this model into VRAM and use it relative to how Meta previously made Llama 3. And Llama 3 was really interesting, but the issue with Llama 3 was it was actually really hard to quantize and fine-tune given how it was trained. And with pre-training, this is kind of a new frontier. Sometimes this is pretty straightforward, like when we saw modifications of DeepSeek R1, and there are other times where we just don't really see much of a yield. What's really cool with this, and why I think Meta is really making a push to local AI being one of their bigger focuses, although they make so much money doing the exact opposite, is they keep referencing the NVIDIA H100 and the NVIDIA DJX host that has H100s in it as a pretty great way to run these models locally. And what's also cool is they're designed with native multimodality. So whether or not this will actually make sense to run locally, we'll just have to wait and see. But we do know that this is a definite feature in these. And what I will say is when you're looking at text alone or multimodality, the accuracy and performance will probably vary wildly. If you've messed around with the VLMs at all, especially with the Mistral VLMs, you'll know that even with Mistral's models that do visual and text being relatively similar, the performance metrics are really quite different. And like any advanced model, these are also using post-training. So they mention here that our newest models include smaller and larger options to accommodate a large range of use cases, basically meaning how many GPUs you're able to fit in or able to afford to buy for your local setup or for your company's inference setup. They state here that as our product workhorse model for general assistant and chat use, Llama 4 Maverick is a really great choice, specifically for its precise image understanding and creative writing. So again, what's really cool is we are now, as local AI people, seeing a lot of really interesting benefits from Meta changing their AI focus with a lot of their consumer products, which is really, really cool to see. They mentioned using SFT, RL, and a bit of DPO. So this is going to be a really interesting model to evaluate given its performance. Now, one of the hottest things that has changed in the few months that I've taken a bit of a break, I'll admit, is that now model efficiency and price per token is basically everything. DeepSeek R1 really was the biggest deal, not because of the Chinese lied about how much it really took to train it, but it was a big deal because it was just so cheap relative to everything else available, and it made OpenAI look like kind of a joke. So what's cool here is even with how cheap Gemini 2.0 Flash is, which I still think is one of the best ways to do OCR at scale, Llama 4 Maverick is still about the same price. DeepSeek V3 is still pretty expensive relative to this if you're looking at just the cost for 1 million input tokens and output tokens. The price is pretty interesting. And what's funny is there's a range here. So I wonder how they got to that range. But the funny thing is when you compare it to GPT-4 Omni, which at this point is a relatively old model, there's just no comparison. The performance here is across the board than anything we've seen from OpenAI. These are also open. OpenAI has still not given us an open source model to date. And it's important to note that DeepSeek V3.1 also has no multimodal support. It's still only text. And the benchmarks get pretty interesting. You know, again, I'm going to sit back and say that we just need to fence sit a little bit longer to see how accurate these benchmarks actually are, because obviously these companies cherry pick initially. But the benchmark results for Llama 4 Maverick, so not even the most advanced of these models, is pretty great when you compare it to Gemini 2.0 Flash. And obviously now we have Gemini 5 Flash, that's quite a bit better, and Gemma 3, which I think is almost a better comparison to the smallest of these models, but it's really interesting to see what has been coming from Meta. So the needle and the haystack benchmarks, again, are always pretty impressive. These models are meant to do this now, so I don't think it's maybe as really interesting as it used to be. These are interesting in terms of dictating how good these models will be at coding, because understanding large complex ASTs, which is how text and code is represented in tools like Cursor, is really important relative to these benchmarks. They're also really happy to show that they've improved a lot when it comes to instruction-tuned benchmarks. And you'll see here that Mistral 3.1 and Gemma 3 are all here. And Llama 4 Scout, the smallest of the models, is really, really competitive here. And for those of you who want to run this on your 4090s, or maybe with your modded 48 gig 4090s from China, which you should buy while they're available, this really could be an incredible option. And we're just going to have to wait a few days to see how people can actually shove these into GPUs that they have at home, but it's really, really interesting and looking really, really good. Now, although we can't use Llama 4 Behemoth, what we can do is we can see some benchmarks that they're at least showing us now. So this is the creme de la creme, the most advanced model that Meta has worked on. So they're comparing it to the most powerful models that are currently in existence, those being Claude Sonnet 3.7, Gemini 2.0 Pro, and GPT 4.5. So Llama 4, they're claiming to be better than Claude Sonnet 3.7. Now, the irony here is, unless you have like $200,000 to spend on GPUs, you're just not going to be running this locally. But the price per token will be the really interesting part here. And Meta is another one of these companies that has a lot of really great data when it comes to just programming data from developers. So I'm really, really looking forward to see how great Llama 4 is at programming, especially if I could use this locally with Cursor instead of Cloud Sonnet 3.7. And if you use most of these for coding, please let me know in the comments, because I'm looking for some great workflows to actually make some tutorials about. And if you want to make tutorials for me, also leave a comment below. And like any of these big companies, you have to say that there's safeguards and protections. I don't know if you can do Studio Ghibli style image generation with this. Yeah, there's some extra beefy safety and copyright systems here. And also everyone wants to work with Meta on their cool models. Now, one really cool thing is that Grok, not from X, but the accelerator company, already is offering Llama 4 on their systems for free. And let's try a few things here. So there are a few things that I like to do now that are a bit different. My favorite coding benchmark, which I'm going to show in a different video, is actually taking a Lovable page and then asking it to add a Cloudflare capture. You have a benchmark you really like, please let me know in the comments below. I also really like the revolving kind of geometry bounce setup. That's a great benchmark as well. Since we're in Grok though, I just want to see basically what the performance looks like and if this actually gives us something that's readable when I ask it for copy or just kind of written text. So just to clarify what model we're using, we currently are on Llama 4 Scout, so this is the smallest model, the one that you guys would probably be able to use on your GPUs. I'm still waiting to get some more GPUs since 5090s are impossible, and I've in theory purchased a 4090 with 48 gigs of RAM. We'll see if it ever shows up in the... So first what I'm going to say here is I'd like to go CASF Giants game, and let's see if this gives me instructions or options. So I'll hit submit. Wow, that was fast. So it only 580 milliseconds, that's all there. Cool, it understands that those are near peer 45. That was incredibly fast. I always forget how fast, because I do everything locally. Wow, that was fast. Okay, so I want to try something multimodal. Now I'm going to say, how many robots are in this picture? So what's cool is we have all the multimodal stuff in Grok too. I have not tried this before. So it says there are 2 robots visible in this image. Let's see if we can do some OCR as well. So I'm going to say, and it got it. So it got Unitree perfectly. That's really, really cool. Now what I want to try is something a little bit harder. So I'm going to say, let's say I want to represent a tide chart. So you can't really do this. It's kind of a goofy question, but in theory you could. So if I wanted to represent a tide chart as an abstract syntax tree, we could do this. So it's basically asking it to force some data into kind of an interesting data structure. Let's build a Python function. Wow. And one thing I'm really surprised is that Cursor doesn't actually offer a Grok integration yet, which is surprising. Azimuth. The idea here is that if you have the sun azimuth, you can roughly understand where you are. And then if you understand where you are, you can roughly estimate what the tides will be. So you have to have the previous, so it's cheating a little bit because it's asking for a reference of the previous high tide. And it's giving me an example azimuth of SF. And it's also using some APIs to kind of check. So this is really interesting. It's very, very fast. Obviously, everything on Grok is fast, but some of these models will get kind of all over the place once you start really using them. I really want to try feeding a bunch of data into this. I've been doing a lot of stuff. I can't share too much of what I'm working on, but a lot of it has to do with tariff tracking. And so if you're interested in that, interested in working on those problems, please feel free to leave a comment below. But this model is really cool. There are a few other models I'm really excited to show you guys that came out earlier this week. And I'm really going to try to set a little bit of time aside every few days to make videos. Since I'm working on this stuff, it's been a little bit harder to make videos consistently. So let me know if you plan to run this on your own GPUs. Let me know what new GPUs you guys are planning on buying given the new release of NVIDIA's offerings. Obviously, things are getting really, really interesting with tariffs, given what we can get from Taiwan and China. But yeah, let me know what you think. As always, I hope you learned something from this video, and I'll see you in the next one.